Hello everyone. Welcome back to my channel. If you are new to this channel, please subscribe, like, and turn post notifications on. Today's discussion will be about the fallacy. Fallacy is a faulty reasoning that occurred in the argument. A fallacy is also a defect or mistake in reasoning. And when the arguer uses other means such as intimidation, manipulation, and pity expression in the argument, then the arguer is said to be committed fallacy. Both deductive and inductive arguments may contain fallacy. If they do, they are either unsound or uncogent, which means they contain false premises and incorrect reasoning in general. Fallacy can be classified, formal and informal fallacy. A formal fallacy is a fallacy that can be detected by just examining the form or structure of an argument. The formal fallacy occurs in only deductive arguments that have identifiable forms, such as categorical and hypothetical syllogisms. If categorical and hypothetical syllogism are invalid because of the incorrect form they had. Example 1. All birds are white. All mammals are white. Hence, all birds are mammals. These arguments have the following forms: all A are B, all C are B, all A are C. This argument is a deductive, or more specifically, a categorical syllogism. However, the argument is invalid. The question is why? Because the argument is incorrect in its structures, that is why it is invalid. The problem of this argument lies in the second argument. If we interchange letters C and B in the second premises, then the argument would be valid. And the argument again has the false premise that all birds are white. Therefore, this argument commits a formal fallacy because of its inappropriate or incorrect structure. Examples 2. If unicorns exist, then people will perish. People perish. Hence, unicorns exist. These examples have the following forms: if A then B, there is B, hence, B. This argument is a deductive argument, or more specifically, a hypothetical syllogism. We gave letter A for the antecedent and letter B for the consequent. The question is whether the argument is valid or invalid. The argument is clearly invalid. Because, in principle, it is not the consequence that should have come first but the antecedent. Therefore, if we interchange the letters A and B in the first premises, then the argument would be valid. However, this argument is clearly invalid and commits a formal fallacy because of its incorrect structure. The second form of fallacy is called informal fallacy. An informal fallacy is a defect that is found in the content of the argument, which could be inductive or deductive. Examples 1. All music is sweet. Everything sweet is made with sugar. As a result, all music is made with sugar. These examples have the following forms: all A are B. All C are D. All A are D. This is a deductive argument. When we look at the form, it seems like the argument is valid and the conclusion follows with strict necessity, but it is not. What makes this argument fallacious is because of the word sweet. In the first premise, the word sweet refers to the taste of music. And in the second premise, the word sweet refers to the actual taste of sweetness that is made with sugar. The conclusion follows from two different premises. Therefore, we detected the fallacy of this argument by examining a defect that occurred in the content of the argument. Structurally, the argument looks good and proper, but when we examine the content, we find that the arguer has made a fallacy, specifically an informal fallacy. Now let's get into the categories of informal fallacies. There are 22 informal fallacies that are categorized into 5 groups. Fallacy of relevance. Fallacy of weak induction. Fallacy of presumption. Fallacy of ambiguity. Fallacy of grammatical analogy. Let's start with fallacy of relevance. The fallacy of relevance is a fallacy, and it is committed when the premise of an argument is logically irrelevant to the conclusion, and bases its conclusion on psychological or emotional expression. In other words, the fallacy of relevance is committed when someone makes an argument that has nothing to do with the subject at hand, in an attempt to distract or mislead the audience. Under the fallacy of relevance, there are 8 fallacies. Let's start with the first one. 1. Appeal to force. In the appeal to force fallacy, the arguer uses either physical or psychological force that could be intimidation to get the audience to accept the conclusion. For examples: Mr. Derrick, you'd better believe my arguments for the existence of God. After all, I don't think that you want to suffer the rest of your life in hell hereafter. In this example, the arguer is intimidating Mr. Derrick by saying that if you don't believe in what I believe regarding God's existence, you are going to suffer in hell hereafter. So the arguer is saying that you should believe in the conclusion that I draw, using both psychological and physical threats for the acceptance of the conclusion. 2. Appeal to pity. The appeal to pity takes place when an arguer tries to get people to accept a conclusion by making them feel sorry for someone. For example: I know that driving while drunk isn't legal, Mr. Officer, but you shouldn't punish me. After all, I am a very religious and patient person, and I don't deserve to be punished for such a case. In this example, the arguer is mentioning some pitiable or regretful reason for accepting the conclusion that he doesn't deserve to be punished. Being religious, poor, and patient don't identify the person as innocent. So the arguer just mentioned some pitiable reasons to be out of punishment. And when the arguer does this, then the arguer committed the appeal to pity fallacy. 3. Appeal to the people. The appeal to the people fallacy is all about the majority voice or preferences. Appeal to the people fallacy has 2 approaches: direct and indirect approach. A direct approach is one in which a given argument is addressed to a large group of people. Indirect approach, on the other hand, is an argument addressed to one or more individuals in relation to the majority. The indirect approach is classified into 3 parts: bandwagon, appeal to vanity, and appeal to snobbery. The first one is bandwagon fallacy. Bandwagon fallacy is related to the majority's voices, feelings, and interests. Just because the majority preferred a given idea or product, the arguer invites the audience to accept the majority's preferences in general. For example, Jordan shirts are the best ones, since it is used by the majority of Americans. Here, Jordan's shirt is assumed to be the best one because the majority preferred it. So whenever a product or a given idea is related to majority preference, then the argument commits the bandwagon fallacy. The second one is appeal to vanity. Whenever the arguer relates a product with famous persons for the acceptance of the product or the conclusion, the arguer commits the fallacy of vanity. What makes the argument fallacious is that the product is assumed to be good because celebrities use it. For example, the new Dior shoes are the best ones. It were also worn by a famous musician, Nicki Minaj. Here, the arguer promotes the product by mentioning musicians, specifically Nicki Minaj, for the purpose of selling the product. Therefore, the argument is fallacious. More specifically, an appeal to vanity. The third one is appeal to snobbery. The appeal to snobbery fallacy is committed whenever the product is associated with a higher social class. Most often, they are called the few. For example, the new Rolls-Royce boat tail car is not for everyone, it is for a few selected individuals. In this example, the arguer is informing the audience that this Rolls-Royce car is for the few, which is for the highest social class, and encouraging the audience that if you buy the item or the car, you will be like that of the higher social class or the few. So the arguer has committed snobbery fallacy. 4. Argument against person fallacy. Argument against person fallacy is a fallacy, and it is committed when a person criticizes the opponent's argument. But the criticism is not against the idea presented by the person, but against the person himself. Argument against person fallacy classified into 3 parts. A. Ad hominem abusive. B. Ad hominem circumstantial, and C. U2, tu quoque, fallacy. A. Ad hominem abusive. Ad hominem abusive fallacy committed when a person attacks the other argument by verbally abusing it. Therefore, this fallacy is an attack on the person who is making an argument, rather than addressing the argument itself. For example, no one should trust Mr. Jack's argument about unity, after all, he is a racist. In this example, the first person responds to the other person's argument by verbally abusing it. That is, by insulting or saying he is a racist. Instead of confronting Mr. Jack's argument, the opponent just prefers to discredit it by verbally abusing it. So, the argument is fallacious, that is, ad hominem abusive. B. Ad hominem circumstantial. Ad hominem circumstantial fallacy is committed when the person discredits the other's argument by alluding to it. For example, Mr. Daniel's argument about tax fraud is worthless. After all, Mr. Daniel is a government official who always thinks that he is a responsible government servant. In this example, the arguer tries to refute a claim, that is Mr. Daniel's claims, by referring indirectly. C. U2, or tu quoque, fallacy. U2, or tu quoque, fallacy is committed when the person responds to criticism with criticism of their own. For example, let's see the conversation between two friends. Rachel, you shouldn't get an abortion while you are expecting a 4-month-old unborn child, you may lose your life. And Elizabeth replied, what do you mean, Rachel? When you got pregnant last year, you aborted your child. And you were fine, therefore, your argument is not correct. In this conversation, Rachel tries to convince her friend Elizabeth not to get an abortion. But Elizabeth replies that you too are doing this when you are pregnant. So she concludes that Rachel's argument is incorrect. So here, Elizabeth made the you too fallacy by mentioning the past life experience Rachel had when she was pregnant. 5. Fallacy of accident. The fallacy of accident is committed by an argument that applies a general rule to a particular case, in which some special circumstance, accident, makes the rule inapplicable. More precisely, the fallacy of accident is committed when a general rule misapplied to specific cases. For example, nobody should intentionally murder anyone, anywhere. As a result, a soldier should not be required to murder anyone on the battlefield. What makes this argument fallacious is that certain general situations or rules are misapplied to specific cases. The general rule here is that nobody should intentionally murder anyone, anywhere. And the specific case is a soldier should not be required to murder anyone on the battlefield. Therefore, the arguer proceeds from misinterpreting a general case to a specific one. 6. Missing the point fallacy. A missing the point fallacy is committed when the premises of an argument do support a particular conclusion, but not the conclusion that the arguer actually draws. In other words, the premises of one argument support a particular conclusion, but another vaguely related conclusion is drawn instead. For example, most of the government officials are inexperienced, and they don't really care about the majority voice, which is seeking justice in all circumstances. The conclusion is obvious: we must kill the government officials. Here, what makes the argument fallacious is the conclusion that the arguer has drawn. Here, the arguer just concludes a given idea by misunderstanding the logical implications of the premises, so that he commits the missing the point fallacy. 7. Straw man fallacy. The straw man fallacy is committed when someone misrepresents their opponent's argument in order to easily refute it. For example, Mr. Johnson argued that we need to support the black people who are migrating to different countries for the sake of survival. Apparently, Mr. Johnson is against white people. He doesn't really care about the rest of the human race that is living throughout the world. Therefore, Mr. Johnson's arguments are ridiculous. What makes this argument fallacious is that Just because Mr. Johnson supports black people, doesn't make him racist or anti-white people at all. Therefore, the arguer just misinterpreted Mr. Johnson's argument for the purpose of more easily attacking it. 8. Red herring fallacy. A red herring fallacy is committed when someone introduces an irrelevant issue to divert attention from the original discussion. For example, a company manager says that we cannot raise salaries. Salary is really significant for employees to manage their daily life situations. But we still provide great benefits for our employees. This argument is a red herring, because the mention of employee benefits distracts from the real point, which is that salaries will not be raised. Thanks for watching.